long before watching Lawrence of Arabia again, long before that episode of Meet the Press that gripped me in 2007, I'd been struck by something else. Something else helped shape my thinking and encourage me to think outside the box, especially when it comes to these seemingly incessant Middle Eastern wars. That something happened at the end of World War II. Let's go back in time. In these shots, the Japanese are formally surrendering on board the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. It's September 2nd, 1945. Supreme Allied Commander in occupied Japan, General Douglas MacArthur, is speaking. Tragically, there is no video of his victory proclamation, which was prepared beforehand and broadcast to the nation later that day. Via shortwave radio, though, and the National Broadcasting Corporation, that victory proclamation has been preserved.
It must be of the spirit if we are to save the flesh.
It must be of the spirit if we are to save the flesh, MacArthur declares. What does he mean? Well, while keeping our minds not so much on Japan now, but on Islam, let's listen to a bit more of that proclamation.
Men since the beginning of time have sought peace. Various methods through the ages have been attempted to devise an international process to prevent or settle disputes between nations. From the very start, workable methods were found insofar as individual citizens were concerned. But the mechanics of an instrumentality of larger international scope have never been successful. Military alliances, balances of power, leagues of nations, all in turn failed, leaving the only path to be by way of the crucible of war. The utter destructiveness of war now blots out this alternative. We have had our last chance. If we do not devise some greater and more equitable system, Armageddon will be at our door. The problem basically is theological and involves a spiritual recrudescence and improvement of human character that will synchronize with our almost matchless advance in science, art, literature, and all material and cultural developments of the past 2,000 years. It must be of the spirit if we are to save the flesh.
Did you grasp what the general just said? Whatever else he was saying, what he said indirectly is that for all their mighty arsenal of ships, aircraft, bombs, and submarines, the Pentagon, the Kremlin, the war machinery of Tokyo, Berlin, London, Paris, and Beijing, for that matter, are all limited. There are some things military might is just not equipped to handle. Extrapolate to the Middle East, and it's safe to conclude that what he has just told us is that climbing into the heads or minds of Al-Qaeda or the Taliban or ISIS fighters is not exactly a military skill. 10,000 nuclear bombs won't shake a determined jihadist. As the saying goes, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. Wars are essentially spiritual conflicts, MacArthur argued. Well, let's turn that around. If wars are essentially spiritual conflicts, then solving them, therefore, easing the tensions, getting the hatred out of the heart must involve spiritual weapons, which is, as I said, why I came to Iran. I came here first to find and then assemble the pieces for the only weapon on earth that I believe capable of stopping ISIS recruiting in its tracks. Let me say it again. Those pieces are here in Iran and no place else. I'll explain more as we go on. Besides the obvious, which is prayer, what spiritual weapon can anyone bring to bear here in the Middle East? What spiritual weapon can anyone bring to bear in this conflict with people who believe Prophet Muhammad predicted the rise of the caliphate for which they're prepared to die. Answer: as far-fetched and crazy and ridiculous as it might sound to you, the answer is the Word of God. That's the weapon. No, I'm certainly not talking about some mushy, lovey-dovey concept of putting flowers down rifle barrels, as was done by protesters of the Vietnam War in the 1970s. I'm talking about an explosive, potent weapon that Islam, Judaism, and Christianity all profess to hold sacred. I'm talking about a real weapon here, one that's been basically overlooked for millennia. A weapon that comes in the form of an explicit challenge. A challenge that once presented to ISIS will separate the men from the boys. Yes, I'm deliberately thinking outside the box today because I want to stop a war. This current war, or potential war, between the United States and Iran or their proxy forces might not directly involve ISIS. But I believe the lessons learned as we challenge ISIS can be applied in this field too. Beyond ISIS, other Muslim fighters will find this challenge, which I'll outline to you before this series is over, impossible to answer. Impossible to look in the eye. Let me repeat. Short of going nuclear, the only way to stop these Middle East wars, I believe, is to issue a public challenge that all parties in the conflict can respect, even as they try to answer it. From Durban to Disneyland, Baghdad to Berlin, it's got to be done publicly. It's got to be Elijah and the prophets of Baal upon Mount Carmel all over again. What am I saying? MacArthur was right. We've got to think outside the box. Let me repeat. If wars are essentially spiritual conflicts, as MacArthur claimed, then we've got to use spiritual weapons to stop them. What this planet needs, if we are to have any hope of stopping these Middle Eastern wars, is a modern showdown on Carmel.